Good afternoon, everyone. It's Friday, 5 o'clock East Coast time. Welcome to the WhiskyCast Live Happy Hour Whiskey Fellowship webcast for June 12th. I'm Mark Gillespie in the WhiskyCast studios in Haddonfield, New Jersey. Hope you've had a good week health-wise, and hope that things are going well in your life right now. It's been a very stressful week, a very stressful month. Hell, a very stressful year for a lot of us. And hopefully over the next hour or so, we can help take some of the edge off of that. We have two very good guests joining us in the next few minutes. Rachel Barrie, the master blender for BenRiach Distillery Company, Brown-Forman's distilleries in Scotland. That includes BenRiach, Glenglassaugh, and GlenDronach distilleries. And Dhavall Gandhi, who was at the Macallan for a while and is now the master blender for the Lakes Distillery in the Lakes District of England. And he's just out with his new Whiskey Maker's Reserve number 3 edition. We will talk with him about that as well, and we will take your questions in the various chat rooms. If you're watching us on Twitter, don't respond to the tweet with this live stream in it, because we won't see those responses until after the show ends. Catch us on Periscope, YouTube, or our Facebook page if you want to have a chance at getting your questions live on the air. Before I bring in our guests, I do want to give you a quick update on some of the news that we had the other day in our Whiskey Wednesday webcast. Fawn Weaver from Uncle Nearest sort of gave us a tease about an announcement that was coming yesterday on a project that Uncle Nearest and Jack Daniels were working on, but she stopped short of giving us all the details. We now have those details. It is the Nearest and Jack Advancement Initiative between the two brands, a $5 million program that will include 3 phases. The first is a School of Distilling to be named for Nearest Green at Motlow State Community College in the Lynchburg area of Tennessee. It's actually on land that was donated by the Motlow family, which owned Jack Daniels for many years and traces its lineage to the original Jack Daniel. They sold the distillery to Brown-Forman in 1956, and about 12, 13 years later, donated a bunch of land in the Lynchburg area to be used as the campus for Motlow State. They will have a distilling school that should be open by the fall of 2021. They're still waiting for final approval from state officials and accreditation. There will also be 2 programs for African Americans within the industry. One program to help early career and mid-career employees in the industry get a move up into consideration for positions such as distillery managers, blenders, and production management, and also a business incubator for African American entrepreneurs who want to work with the whiskey industry and develop spirits brands that will provide both marketing and branding guidance as well. Now, that's just the one program. We also got word today that Diageo is kicking in $20 million for what's going to be called the Diageo Community Fund, which will be used to help support programs in the hospitality sector that are minority-owned, specifically Black-owned businesses, in terms of helping them recover not only from the pandemic, but helping them to build those businesses as well and help build stronger communities. We'll have more on that on this weekend's WhiskyCast podcast, along with my interview with Samara Rogers of the Samara Rivers, of the Black Bourbon Society, who issued a call this week for bourbon brands and the entire American whiskey industry to not only use words in showing their commitment to the minority community, but to back it up with some action. We'll talk with her about that as well. We'll again take your questions at in the various chat rooms, and let's bring in our guests right now. Rachel Barrie and Dhavall Gandhi. Rachel, of course, as I said earlier, with the Brown-Forman distilleries in Scotland. Dhavall with the Lakes Distillery in Setmore, England, although I know you live in Glasgow, right, Dhavall?
Yeah, I live in Edinburgh. So
okay.
Yeah.
That's 50, 60 miles off, but what's 50, 60 miles?
I love Scotland.
Rachel, how are you doing today?
I'm great, thank you. Yes, I've been had a good day at work. Been selecting some casks and having the usual fun and games making whiskey. So I'm quite lucky. I get to can go in and take lots of samples home. and do my analysis at home. So I'm very, very fortunate that I can do that.
Do they have
So
a
how are
courier
you, Mark?
samples from the distillery? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Rachel.
Yeah. Well, they do. They send samples down, just by courier. So, vattings for bottlings that I have to approve, and obviously all the new product development samples, which, to be honest, isn't really much of where you are. I mean, it's best in a warehouse. However, it's also great to do it at home because, then you're like your whiskey friends and consumers. You're able to appreciate going outdoors on the patio or sitting in by the fireside with a dram that you're developing. So you're kind of very much being a consumer as you develop, which I quite like too.
Dhavall, how do you get your samples up to Edinburgh from the distillery?
Yeah, I think very similar to Rachel here. I get it every day around 10:30. I get a UPS guy knock my door, so I get all my new mix samples coming in. So I've been working from home as well. So I made my study a kind of a little lab where I'm playing around with different stuff. And anyways, I mean, it's more the bottling samples, the filtration reduction samples, the daily new make samples, they keep on flowing through. But I have been, I've visited the distillery twice now since February. So at least I go in the morning and come back at night, but I can do a whole day of blending at the site. But yeah, very similar, but it's very different, but I like it. I'm not complaining. Sorry.
What's in your glass, Dhavall?
All right. So I've been actually just like as Rachel mentioned that she's been drinking at the fireplace. I'm working on one of the Whiskey Maker Reserve series. So I'm just trying this prototype at different times. And I always like, after dinner, sometimes I try it in the evening. And when the pubs are open, I sometimes take a small sample to a pub and try to experiences there as well. So this is one of the Whiskey Maker series that's coming out next year. So just kind of putting some finishing touches on it. So
okay, Rachel, what's in yours? Your first.
Well, I'm just really enjoying myself tonight because it's Friday. So it's been a nice sunny day outside. So some of the days, so I've just got a BenRiach 10, which is for me a wonderful uplifting dram for the start of the weekend because it's just like a delicious orchard and wonderful creamy patisserie in a glass. Just what I need at the end of the week, ready for the weekend. It's great. But today I've been working on quite a range of different expressions that are coming up. So Cask-Strength GlenDronach for one, which we release batches every year. Also some cask bottlings coming up as well. So of course we do cask bottlings across the three expressions, and that's part of it as well.
And for the record, it's a very hot, humid day here in New Jersey, which I keep thinking about taking all the gear outside to do one of these. And then I get outside and go, no, I'm not going to sit out there because otherwise the only thing I would want would be a cold beer on a day like this. But I figured a rather appropriate whiskey would be the Uncle Nearest 1856 bottling. So I figured I would have that today. As I keep pointing out during these shows, I try not to pick any of the whiskeys from our hosts because otherwise I don't want to play favorites, and I try to stay neutral. So I try to pick something from someone else to drink during these. But once again, it's been one hell of a week. So let's slancha and let's get through it and move on to the weekend. But we are starting to get some questions coming in, and comment from our pal Chris Ratcliffe, who's glad you could make it, Rachel, because I know we tried to have you on a few days ago and it didn't work for a commitment. But he says that your glass, drink it my way mantra has stuck with him and has been recommended to many others. Explain that for folks.
Okay, apologize because my son has put the printer on, so I think I need to go and switch it off, and then I can answer this. Oh, you can hear me. Okay. I can't believe this is right beside me. Okay. Yes. I think for me, it's all about your nose, your experience, your imagination, and what you enjoy. So it's up to you how you will enjoy it. And for me, on a night like tonight, a BenRiach 10-year-old neat in the glass is perfect. If it was like 30 degrees outside, which doesn't happen very often, but occasionally we get, late 20s Celsius. And I was outside. I really love BenRiach with ginger ale and fruit. It's just very, very refreshing. So, I think it's, however you enjoy it, please enjoy it. It's up to you. It's in your glass. I'm definitely one for appreciation and enjoyment rather than trying to say you have to do it this way. I'm probably the opposite, really.
Dhavall, we have a couple of comments coming in for you from Cotton. I hope your UPS delivery guy isn't watching this. You're going to find some samples missing.
Yeah, we have we try to use different delivery guys, but mostly it's UPS. So hopefully they don't know outside what's in the package, but let's hope he's not watching it.
We have for years referred to the UPS and FedEx guys around here as the whiskey fairies. Daughter gave the delivery guys those names years ago, and we've had the same ones for years, and they figured out long ago what's coming, and because all these boxes are marked with alcohol all over it, and they're going, "What the hell are you guys doing?" Once you explain it to them, they get it. Also, the Silver Lock Whiskey Club points out your bookshelves seem to have too many books and not enough whiskey on them.
All right, all my whiskeys are in my other room, but I'm a reader first, whiskey maker second. So I love reading, and that's what gives me the energy. That what gives me all these different ideas to try, different domains that I try. So yeah, I love reading, but this is my study. So there's one bookshelf which is my library, and there's other bookshelf right opposite to it. It's my anti-library. So it just keeps on reminding me how ignorant I am when I look at that and the books I need to read.
We have a great question on that for both of you from Inside the Cask. What whiskey books, if any, would you recommend? And they point out that, Dhavall, you ought to be able to recommend at least one of the ones from behind you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it depends. I mean, there are a lot of technical books and there are a lot of books that I really enjoy. And I think one of the recent books by Dave Broom, The Way of the Whiskey, is probably, it's about Japanese whiskey. One of my favorite books, I would call it. The second book, I think, is Whiskey by Aeneas MacDonald. It's a small little book. It is so romantic, just reading through it. It's quick. I mean, you can have a dram and just finish the book probably in half an hour. And if you want to get more technical, in depth about things, and I think there is one book that I highly recommend is Whiskey, Technology, Production and Marketing by Inge Russell. And that's a very technical book if you want to get into the depths. But I think Dave Broom's Japanese whiskey book, The Way of Whiskey, is by far my favorite. It kind of blends the philosophy, the whiskey making, the style, a little bit of the culture, who makes it, how they make it, how the culture influences what you make. And I think that's probably the book I highly recommend.
Rachel, what do you recommend?
Well, I'm a big fan of Charlie MacLean, so I think I'd find Charlie MacLean's Miscellany of Whiskey difficult to beat because it's got so much history in it as well as the science as well. So it's got the character of the past as well as the a little bit of the alchemy and the science. So I love that, and obviously the Whiskey Bible's good as well. To really look at a great number of samples. I think over 3,000. So you get a good kind of all-round feel of all the distilleries and where they sit in different rankings. So that's quite interesting, I think, for people who are new to whiskey.
The one I read most recently was the book that Peggy No Stevens and Susan Rigler came out with, What Fork to Use with Your Bourbon. A book on pairing up bourbons and food. and doing some cooking as well. And I thought it was interesting, but I've also been reading the new Canadian Distilleries book that our pal Davin DeCurgamo and Blair Phillips did.
Yeah, that's a good book. Yeah.
Very good book. And there's a lot of them out there. I mean, I think between Charlie and Gavin Smith, I mean, those guys have probably written at least 40 books between them. So there ought to be plenty out there to keep yourselves busy. Let's see. Also, Ashley Penny, A Glass Apart is one amazing book, too. That's the one Finan O'Connor wrote about the history of Irish pot still whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
And Mark Totten says, Barley to Blarney, I think it's called, is an essential for Irish whiskey. We also want to point out that while you were talking about Dave Broom's book, Tatsuya jumped in from Japan and said he's drinking coffee since it's 6 a.m. there. We'll excuse that. David Owen, evening everyone from Germany. Such a lovely evening in Hanover, just sitting on the balcony with a nice cigar and sipping a Kalila 12. Heaven. Okay. Kind of a cheeky question from Cheshire Video Productions. You both mentioned that you do a lot of sampling at home now and testing. And I think I know the answer to this, but what stops you from getting overserved sampling all sorts of different whiskeys during the day? How do you moderate your input when you're doing sampling and tasting and blending so that you retain your sobriety, frankly? Let's put it that way. How do you do it? Rachel, let's start with you.
The nose knows, very simply, because 90% of appreciating any malt is on the nose, and especially, I mean, I've nosed and tasted a lot of whiskey over the past nearly 30 years in the industry, and once you've calibrated your senses to how different aromatics then deliver on taste as well, you can actually tell a hell of a lot just by nosing. And obviously by nosing, you're not going to get any effect, any physiological effect. It's only just the smell, and then you just have to breathe. And it's out of your system. So you can, nose a couple of hundred samples in, a few hours, and be perfectly alert to go and do, any kind of other part of your job that's not involved in whiskey. You could drive, and then if you have to taste, I mean, that's why it's great to take samples home, and obviously with a spittoon as well, which is a bit of a shame, but it's important to protect your senses as well, because if you taste a few, after about 4, I think your judgment is affected. So you're better to actually stay fresh and just nose, and then you can cover hundreds a day, or about 150,000 I've nosed in the past few years.
Sorry about that. Didn't mean to interrupt, but Dhavall, go ahead. How do you do it?
Same. It's all to do with nosing. I think there are 2 ways to do it. I mean, for me, just very similar to Rachel, everything is by nose. So the daily samples, the new make samples that come in, whether the cask assessments that you do, whether it's maturation or just for blending, everything is pretty much by nose. But what I always love to do is, after the prototypes are created, I would also like to see the palate, the finish, how it impacts. But that I do it at my own leisure time. Right, that's what I'm doing today while I'm talking to everyone. That's what I do in the evenings, or but in the daytime, it's discipline. And I think one thing that we did, it was fun when I was at Macallan, and we did at the Great Western Road office, we did a breathalyzer test with the Glasgow police. And what we did was, so it was myself, Max McFarlane, Gordon Motion, and we were analyzing different samples. So we were trying to see, do you actually get, if you get breathalyzed after you drive off for work, would you get pulled over? And what we found out, that it takes around 35 to 40 minutes for your lungs to clear out before you can drive. So from that day onwards, I mean, that's been my pretty much a rule, that at least I stop nosing, an hour before when I'm driving. But that's something, pretty much, even if you nose it, you are not getting absorbed, because it's not getting absorbed in the intestine. But at least when you are doing a breathalyzer test, it does come out. So
And I posted this question for Rachel from David Finkel. You've worked for several iconic brands over the years and have been involved in the development and release of many memorable expressions. Do you have a favorite or two?
Well, I'm learning every day, so it has to be, because I've got so much in my mind now, in my nose. I've experienced so much. I've had an incredible journey in whiskey. I think the ones I'm making right now are the ultimate because they're the culmination of nearly 30 years in the industry. So, I've loved every single whiskey I've made. Um, but I live in the present, and it's what I make today that means the most to me. I would say the GlenDronach 15-year-old revival. Some of you might know it. It's probably the one I have loved the most in the past couple of years, just because it was brought back to life, and very recently it won the best whiskey in the world at the San Francisco World Spirits Competition. So that really says a lot, because I want to make the ultimate whiskey at the end of the day, and to hear that the best whiskey in the world, I thought, yeah, I've arrived. And this whiskey has arrived. This whiskey has arrived, and yeah, it doesn't get much better than that. And of course, I'm always fine tuning. I'm a complete perfectionist. Always raising the bar. Always trying to do better. So just when I think I've got to 100%. I kind of lower that to about 90%. I think, I could just improve it a little bit more and make it a little bit more complex or integrated or whatnot. And hopefully that people will see that shining through in all the whiskies, Scotch whiskies that come from Brown-Forman.
Dhavall, do you have a favorite or memorable one?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of favorites, like as Rachel mentioned. And by the way, Rachel, 15-year-old revival is one of my also go-to drams. Really like it. So congratulations, it's a great dram. And there are a lot of whiskeys that I try. I think there was one whiskey that I tried in America. I know it's something very simple. It's Lagavulin 16. And this was when I was living in America and I was working in corporate finance. And that's the first whiskey, first single malt that actually made me think reality, whether I wanted to change my career or not. And I think for me, that's a very important dram. And then I think there are a lot of other drams I've tasted, but I think one of the other memories I have is at Macallan, there was a 1937 dram that I had opportunity to taste it. And it was unlike any Macallan that I had ever tasted. It was floral, fruity, just light, elegant. And I think that, and for me, something personally, I think the Lakes Whiskey Maker Reserve #1, I think the first one was quite an important dram for me. Just a style that I love. And I always believe in making things or creating things that I love drinking. So, that's my style. That's what I wanted to create.
On that note, we should pass along our congratulations to Travis Adams, who says, I'm drinking my first ever single malt, 3 years and 1 month old. It's not perfect, but I made it. And I know Travis is working at a distillery somewhere. So congratulations, Travis, and hope you have many more.
Yeah, congratulations.
In the future. Bert Doyle in Canada says, Rachel, he's looking at a BenRiach, and he describes it as an autocorrect error later. Limited 94 tawny port finish at 55.6% from Kensington Wine Market. Still just drooling over this one, but afraid to open it just yet. And the comment, what is BenRiach? Is it made from insects? It's part of the
where did that come from?
BenRiach autocorrect series of expressions.
BenRiach. BenRiach.
Autocorrect is fearless yet again.
And Riach's a name that you find in a lot of places in Scotland. It tends to be like a small holding, like my grandfather, great grandfather had kind of little crofts that kind of sold a bit of everything. There was lots of diversity, and it's interesting at BenRiach we have there's a lot of crop rotation in the fields around, and it's one of the most diverse landscapes between the mountain and the sea. And you know, that riach is really meaning that it's diverse diverse landscape. And it's interesting because BenRiach obviously has, you know, one of the most eclectic cask collections in Speyside, and also with the different styles of distilling, with our classic Speyside style, the smoky style, and the triple distilled style. And you know, it's just so reflective of that diversity that takes me back to my grandfather's kind of curiosity shop that had, you know, sold so many different things, you know, that you know, it has that essence to it that I suppose you have to understand Scots language to know to know that. But just think it's BenRiach. There you go. It's rich.
Teach your computer
It's
how to
definitely not roach. It's rich.
get the computer. You have to click that learn spelling thing, otherwise it. Although I will tell you this, it's autocorrect is nothing compared to trying to do automatic transcriptions through AI. I've thrown some interviews of whiskey interviews into AI transcription services, and you would not believe how they screw those things up. I've had some terms come out. I had single barrel. Somebody said single barrel in an interview, and it came out as dingleberry. That's just one. I mean, as bad as autocorrect is, automatic transcription is worse. Now, we have a question for both of you from the Silverlock Whiskey Club. They want to know how you got into whiskey in the first place. Rachel, let's start with you because I know you started out at the Scotch Whiskey Research Institute.
I did, and that was a bit of a fluke as well, because I had my chemistry degree and I wasn't sure what to do, and I just happened to be cycling past the career service at Edinburgh University and dropped in on the last day that the job was advertised as a research scientist, and I got the job. You know, that's where I started, and was there for 4 years, and really got stuck into everything from the, you know, distillation. If it was flavor I was focused on, so, you know, distillation right through to analyzing wood using a bandsaw and using mass spectrometry and looking at wood from all over the world. So I had an incredible experience there, and then got into Glenmorangie first. Was there for 17 years. Was made master blender in 2003. So that's 17 years ago now. Can you believe it? And then on to Bowmore, and leaving the best for last, of course, with GlenDronach, which is where I was born and brought up as well. So I kind of, you know, part of it is, you know, it's kind of in my blood, because you know, my dad loves single malts. GlenDronach's his favorite, and he was born just a few minutes from the distillery, and as was I. So you could say, you know, it was fate. It's in our roots, in my roots, and I just kind of got pulled towards it. The pull was there to bring me in, even though I wasn't kind of conscious of it until then. But it's good to have, you know, a science background to understand the technology and the science behind it. But at the end of the day, it's having a passion, having a nose, using your senses, and you know, and working hard to make the whiskey and enjoy it.
But when you were growing up near GlenDronach, at what age did you realize what they were doing there?
Yeah, I mean, they opened the visitor centre, can you believe it, back in 1976. You know, it was really, I mean, it was one of the biggest distilleries in the area. You know, 50 people used to live on site at the distillery. It's quite incredible. So yeah, back in the 70s. I hate to say that's when I had my let's just say I had my first sniff of whiskey in the 1970s when I was really too young to taste, but I certainly was aware of it. And of course, growing up surrounded by farms, being a young farmer myself, I was very aware of all the barley fields and the real connection between the landscape and the distillery itself, and how there was this cycle of nature from the water to the draff, that then fed the dairy cows, and to the whole ecosystem of the distillery. I think I was always aware of that, but yeah, it definitely is in my blood.
Dhavall, you mentioned your career in corporate finance before, and we've talked about this on the show about a year or so ago. But tell us about your transition from corporate finance to making whiskey.
Yeah, I think I didn't have a very straightforward career in whiskey. So I grew up in India, and my first encounter with whiskey was with my dad or uncle, and probably it was a Johnny Walker or something like that, with soda or chilled water and a highball. And I grew up there, and I moved to US. I studied in Carolina, and I studied corporate finance and economics, just because I came from a family of lawyers and finance people. So, that was already decided. And the plan was that I finish my degree and move back to India. But then I started working for a company called Ernst & Young in mergers and acquisition strategy consulting. And I was traveling quite a bit, every Monday, come back Friday, different clients in different parts of the country. And we were having a client in Kentucky, and it was my senior and myself, and we were on this engagement. And we just decided, rather than going back on Friday to where I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina. So I said, rather than fly to Charlotte, why don't we just stay here, because you're supposed to come back on Monday. And then I think at that time, probably we visited around 12 distilleries near Louisville, and at Maker's Mark, and I knocked on the door of Bill Samuel Sr., and I still have the bottle in my cupboard that he signed. And I just asked him, okay, how do I become a whiskey maker? This is what I want to do. And that Lagavulin 16 has a connection here. And it was on the steps of Maker's Mark. I still have that photo. Still look at it every once in a while just to remind myself. And I decided I want to quit everything what I was doing. Just wanted to become a whiskey blender. That's it. Not working production, not working finance. No, just want to become a whiskey blender. And I came back, took my wife out for dinner, and decided to quit everything and move to Edinburgh at Heriot-Watt University. I did my MSc in brewing and distilling. And then I did my research in whiskey maturation. And after that, there was a big shock, because there's no jobs in blending at that time. And I couldn't find anything. I just wanted to become a blender. I wanted to start blending. So there was two options. Either I go back to America and start working in finance again and call this a gap year or something, or stick around. So I decided to stick around, and Heineken wanted me to join them. So I joined Heineken, became the brewmaster for Heineken. I worked in England. And then an opportunity arose at 3 different Scotch whiskey companies, and I got offered from 2. Decided to go on with Macallan as the whiskey maker, started there. Got more into the blending, and mostly my love, sherry casks, and that's what I love doing, and that's where I kind of got more deeper into it. And then I get a call from the Lake's current chairman, Dr. Alan Rutherford, who was ex-Diageo. Calls me up. I was driving back from Great Western Road, and says, I'm working on this boutique whiskey company. I'm looking for a whiskey maker to come, and this is my vision. Are you interested? And I said first, okay, I didn't even know what Lakes was or where Lakes was. Decided to pay a visit. I fell in love with the place, the people, the vision, the positive area. And long story short, 2016, I started with Lakes, and that's where I am. So not a very straightforward story, but as one of the key things here is a very childhood story. And I don't know if I I don't recall telling about this. When I was in school, and I'm talking about primary school, I used to love smells. I still love smells, and I could smell. So one of the games my classmates would play with me would put different. They will sharpen different pencils, and that time we would have different companies. There was one called Natraj, and there was a Stedtler, and they would put it on my nose, and I would tell them exactly which brand of the pencil came from. And I always loved. There were these few girls in my class, and in the compass box, they had all these erasers. And at that time, you used to get all these erasers with all these different perfumes. And I just, opened. So that love for aromas and perfumes was always there. That always fascinated me. So somehow, I don't know how the universe conspired, and here I am making whiskey. So
We have a great question for you from Chris Ratcliffe, Dhavall. When you joined the Lakes Distillery, did they want a more sherried style and thought of you, or did you taste the new make, talk to owners and drinkers, and start from a blank sheet? And that sort of goes into a topic about creating a house style
yeah,
or distillery. And
no,
Rachel's thoughts on that in a second. But let's answer Chris's question first. How did you decide what to produce at Lakes?
all right, okay. So excellent question. So when I met Lakes for the first time, and I looked at the new make spirit and stuff like that, and I think the Lakes philosophy. I don't know if some of you have tried the Lakes products before. The Lakes One Original One. That was a very different style, and it was never geared towards to be a much more a bourbon oriented style, and the style was very different. The plan was to create a fruity spirit. But when I was approached by Dr. Rutherford, one of the things he promised me was a carte blanche. Come in, and he said, just I want to be a very, very good single malt. Do what you want to do how you want to do it. And I think deciding sherry was pretty much coming from me, because I love sherry, and I'm doing a doctorate on maturation as well. So sherry cask is where I am a student of. So it was very natural for me to have a style that I loved, something that I can put onto. So sherry style came from me coming to Lakes, rather than it was a plant before. And the way I looked at it was what we were trying to create. How do we differentiate ourselves? There are a lot of English whiskey distilleries. They were trying to do their own things. But one of the things at Lakes, Dr. Rutherford and our founders, Dr. Nigel Mills and Paul Curry, they wanted to do was keep it very Scotch style, because they come from the Scotch whiskey background anyways. So, the natural choice for me, I looked at the location, the style we could make. The stills were much more smaller compared to much more lighter. So I can make those tweaks. I can change the fermentation. So the whole idea was, okay, I want to make it a much more sherry style, rather than just sticking to the bourbon only style or lighter spirit style. So I think I hopefully answers the question.
Rachel, how do you develop a house style?
Yes, well, it all starts with the character. That's where it comes from, and it's something that's quite underappreciated, and of course is very elusive as well, is the characteristics of its location. Because you could take one distillery and literally lift it up in its entirety and go and put it in a different part of Scotland, and it would be completely different, even though the process was the same, the ingredients were the same. And there's something very, very elusive about the place, and that's really, for me, where it starts is understanding kind of the more holistic aspect of, like, GlenDronach, right down in the valley of Forg. You're basically at sea level, but you're nowhere near the sea. It's really deep down in a valley, and has a very robust Highland style, very, very distinctive, which marries perfectly with really full-bodied sherry style maturation. So the Spanish oak in combination with Pedro Jimenez, we buy arguably the most the highest number of Pedro Jimenez casks in the industry. It's the king of sherries, it's known as well as Oloroso, and getting just that right balance. So you understand that GlenDronach has kind of, I've coined it as like 4 facets of flavor. It's robust. It has that darkness and that body that it's got substance, and then it also has elegance. The top notes from the saxophone-shaped stills. It's fruity. It's in the Valley of the Brambles. again, linked to that sense of place, and it's got this dark fruit, almost winey character right off the still. It's really quite elusive. How does that come to be? It's not just one thing. And then also it's full-bodied as well, which is why it works really well in sherry casks. And I have to say, to explain this, I have to mention the other two, because you go from the valley to BenRiach, which is actually on a much higher altitude. And this is where I learned to glide. And it's incredible how the synchronicity of everything, it just seems to come together, because BenRiach's halfway between the sea and the mountains. If you go up the hill, if you go north a bit, the distillery there is a little bit more floral. If you go down into Speyside, you get a lot more of a cereal kind of edge to it. But BenRiach's kind of in this sweet spot of Speyside, where we say we've got 40 days more sunshine than the rest of Scotland. Well, it's like Barcelona, the same level of rainfall. So all of this makes a difference and really tells the story of its creation. And as I said, BenRiach having this, idea of this diversity in its creation is what has led to the diversity of style and the interweaving, the collision of flavors that happens between the different distillates when you combine them. The most eclectic cask selection in Scotland, and then when you look at Glenglassaugh, different again. You're right on the coast, and it's like one of the most distinctive distilleries in the world. I've tasted a lot of whiskey. I've never tasted anything like Glenglassaugh, and I've got it in this glass here, and it's literally it's like a combination of like a sour mash or sourdough, the best points of that, with this tropical fruit, overripe character, and a little twist of sea salt. It's like, how does this come to be? And to bring that to life, mostly bourbon cask maturation, some Oloroso sherry as well, and also wine casks work incredibly well with Glenglassaugh, because they bring out that kind of overripe, syrupy sweet character that you get in Glenglassaugh. It's almost like a lambic fermentation. It has so much of that character. So for me, it's about understanding the nature of every element of its creation and then bringing that to life. So it's like a person. It's unique, it's individual, and you nurture the best. And this varies a lot between blenders, I think, the approach. I mean, before I joined, it was like every distillery had a bit of everything. There were, different casks in each distillery, and it was like experiments going on with all three. And then I quickly realized, but this is what this wants to be. Almost the whiskey almost told me what it wanted to be. And that's kind of the direction we're going in.
Question from Richard Dankovic, and I hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. Wants to know about the history behind GlenDronach's heavy use of sherry casks. Is it more of a case of do one thing and do it well, or is there a deeper connection?
Well, of course, it is doing it very well. Mastering the art of sherry cask maturation is the mantra for GlenDronach. And I think, because, Revival won the best whiskey in the world, 15-year-old, I think we're getting there. We can always improve, but I think we've developed sherry cask mastery. But, going back, the distillery's been around since 1826. And back then, the sherry casks were important into Scotland. So it would have been sherry casks in the main that GlenDronach would have been filled into at that point in time. There might have been some claret as well, other fortified wines, maybe port. Also, but that's pretty much it. So there's a legacy going back in time, and it just works. It's the historical connection, I think, is the strongest, but the flavor connection is even stronger, relevant to what people enjoy today.
Dhavall, we have a question for you, from Brass Keysman, who absolutely loved Whiskey Maker #1 and #2, the Whiskey Maker's Reserve. Where does number 3 take us? What are the similarities and what new nuances do we have to look forward to? And you just released that one last week. So tell us about reserve number 3.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Whiskey Maker series, for those who have tried it or not have tried the Whiskey Maker series, it's our house style. It's flavor, flavor packed with flavor, wood forward, and sherry led. I mean, that's the style. And 1, 2, and 3, they are not different batches, but they have the same DNA that goes through it. But what I try to do is express different kind of emotions, different ideas, or different flavor profiles, just by using different combination of different sherry casks. So the number 1, because it was the first in the series, it was quite full on, full bodied, a sherry bomb, intense in dry fruit and ginger character. Number 2 that came after that was much more, had a bit more American oak influence in the sherry cask. It was more vanilla. It was more restrained, more elegant, more confident. Just very confident to just being itself. Number 3 that's coming out, it's very seductive and aromatic. And my grandma, when I grew up, used to take me to this temple, and it was very, very old temple, and I used to always get this peculiar smell about incense and this old wood that has absorbed all these different smells over this, decades of the temple being open. And I wanted to somehow replicate that incense and temple aromas coming through. So what I've used is a combination of course, for us, Oloroso is the very structure, followed by PX. I used a lot of PX as well. But this time I used some cream sherry casks and just gave that aromatic nature to it. So the number 3 is very aromatic and seductive. So hopefully you like it. And the way I like to bottle for Whiskey Maker Reserve is I just go and select different strengths and pick the strength that I like. And I think 54 was the perfect strength for this one. So this is number 3. So I hope you love it.
Great. Thanks for answering that. Rachel Crump wants to say he loves all of the GlenDronach expressions, but would love an extra week of peated production so he can find it a bit easier.
Oh.
Please, please. Peated production you do at GlenDronach.
Well, we do have a traditionally peated expression, which was an evolution of the peated expression that was around for a number of years. And I think it was just last year we released the traditionally peated. So hopefully you can get hold of that now. And if not, I don't think it'll be long. I think you'll be able to get that fairly soon. You should be able to. And, it is the traditional peating level that happened at GlenDronach, through the centuries. So we have recreated, that style. It is, I mean, I love it because it takes me back to my other grandparents' farm, which had the smells of old elm sleepers, old leather, licorice, all these, like an old sweetie shop. And yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. So you should be able to get hold of it if you enjoy peat.
And we have a couple of questions about Glenglassaugh from Tatsuya Ishihara. When is the Glenglassaugh going to get back its age statement? And I think we know an answer to that because David Legoff points out from Australia that they just released an Australian exclusive Glenglassaugh.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, the distillery reawakened right at the end of 2008, so there's not much stock from then. So I think Australia was very lucky to get that. But we will have a few other casks around about 10 years old. It won't be that long to wait. It'll be quite soon. And it's just a matter of time, as I say, because there was this gap between 1986 and 2008, and then from then on, the stock profile has been nurtured in different casks to enable the development of a portfolio going forward. So not long now, and it's going to be. I think you will enjoy it. It's going to be pretty good.
And Mark Totten points out the 21-year-old GlenDronach is the epitome of excellent sherry cask whiskey he's ever tried.
I agree. The Parliament, the 21-year-old, I've got a bottle just here. You can see it in the gold tube. This is handy sitting here, actually. There it is. That's the Parliament. Beautiful, and it's so exquisite. It's actually mostly Pedro Jimenez cask matured, compared to the Allardyce, which is 18 years old, and it's all Oloroso. So you have the age difference, and then you've also got the influence of the Pedro Jimenez. So that makes it just like a wonderful, rich espresso coffee, combined with the deepest, fullest plum pudding and a little bit of spice on top. It's absolutely exquisite, is the Parliament. So I absolutely agree.
I have a question for you from Tor Christensen in Norway. Will you be opening the visitor center at BenRiach and GlenDronach this year? Do you think you'll be able to at all?
I certainly hope so. I think, obviously everyone in Scotland is waiting for the government guidance as to what is happening with hospitality and tourism in Scotland. And touch wood, all going well. We will hopefully be into the next phase in the next week. I'm just thinking 18th of June, I think, is the next kind of check-in as to how's the country doing, and then how can we open. So I certainly I'm hopeful for at some point this summer. Not exactly sure when, but fingers crossed.
Dhavall, what about the visitor center at the lakes?
Yeah, so we hope that we can open in July end or August. I mean, we are going to look around as long as it's safe for our employees and also for the visitors coming in. Yeah, we would love to, get things back to a sense of normality. But hopefully, let's hope that we can open it up very soon.
Question for you both. How do you develop your nose? I mean, Dhavall, you talked about being able to nose different types of pencils when you were a kid. Rachel, when did you realize that you had an above average nose when it came to sensory experiences? And how do you develop those nosing skills?
I don't know if I really realized it when I was younger. I think you have this, you can smell things and you know what they are, but you don't know how you compare with somebody else when you're growing up, I don't think. Obviously I was tested at the Scotch Whisky Research Institute when I got the job, and did very well in the nosing test. So that was the first kind of, oh, look how I'm calibrated, how I perform versus other people. That was the first kind of real test. But I think it's really literally being very mindful, stopping and smelling, using your sense of smell. It's very underutilized, and it's amazing how it enriches your life. I mean, I'm a really, really fond gardener, and my garden is full of rich and beautiful plants, and just the smells in the garden. I cook a lot as well, so lots of different spices, and then obviously appreciate many different spirits and wines as well. So it's just just sniff everything. Stop and sniff the whiskey.
And I like that.
See what you can find. Yeah, it is, because if I'm working on something really serious, because I've got a really serious job as well as nosing whiskey. I have to decide which casks we're going to buy, obviously, look at the supply and demand, and all that side of things as well. But if I'm kind of busy doing my analytical part of my job, I'm like, right, okay, I'm going to go into the sample room now, and I'm just gonna, you've got to be mindful to write tasting notes. You've got to be in the moment. You've got to open your mind to your senses, and allow your sense of smell to weave with your experiences, your thoughts, your emotions, your memories, everything. And it just becomes such a rich experience. So when you do that, it's like anything. Once you develop that ability, you enrich life, I think, as well as the whiskies that you nose.
Dhavall, how do you develop your nose?
Yeah, very similar. I think be a dog. That's what I keep on saying. Just keep on sniffing all the time. And, no matter where I am, whether it's, I love smelling books, old books, and they have this amazing smell. When you're cooking, or when you are just outside, just being aware about it. And I always like to be with nature. And in Edinburgh, we have this beautiful garden called Dr. Neil's Garden. And I go there, every once in a while. I just, completely in the morning, just go for a long walk, just try to absorb all this different, I try to calibrate with nature. I think that's what I probably call it. And again, it's just smelling. And I think for me, I knew that I had a nose because I would drive my mom mad, literally coming back from school or something like that. I would know exactly what she cooked. Just that's how it was. And when I was at Heineken, I was on the sensory panel, and then of course I was a blender, so I got. And I remember Gordon Motion, doing my sensory assessment and making sure I could smell things and stuff. But again, it's just constantly nosing. I think one of the key differences, either you can smell, and I think there are some people who can't smell, and there are some super nosers. There are some people who can probably smell better things than I think what's more important, what I've learned is, what do you do with those smells? How do you integrate those smells? You might smell vanilla and you might smell some sultanas coming through, but how do you play around? How do you have those thought experiments where you can take all these different senses or different sensory experiments, and just turn it around? And again, also it's about discipline. I love to go more deeper into different things. And it's always about the depth, and I try to kind of explore different ideas. So I have also, I try to keep it very, very disciplined. So even if I'm going to be nosing a couple of hundred casks at the end, it's going to be a maker's day, I'll have a very, very simple breakfast, just a porridge, a cup of coffee, just keep it very disciplined. And that's how we do it. Just be yourself. I think that's that's the key, I think.
And Tor Christensen asks, do you use coffee beans for resetting your nose? I think there's a typo in there, but I think that's what he meant. Do you use coffee beans to reset your nose?
I think you can use peated whiskey sometimes, because the coffee beans, the aromatics in coffee beans, just when you put them on the back of your hand, it's got that kind of that dryness, that aroma, that when you smell a peated whiskey, I find that the best thing is to go to peated whiskey if you want to go back to another whiskey and find that the different layers of fruit. It's almost doing going between the extremes. It makes the opposite aroma almost stand out more. So yeah, the coffee works, but going between extremes also works incredibly well. But I mean, it depends on your nose. Some people maybe won't be able to pick up some of the aromas in coffee, and of course, there's 10% of the population can't pick up the phenolics in peat, which is incredible. So literally, it could be. It's amazing, So literally, somebody could think peaty whiskey was like vanilla. Whereas I'll go, oh yeah, I'm like a peat detector, hypersensitive to different levels of peat, and it just shows you how different we are. So I think different things will work for different people. But yeah, doing that recalibration with something, maybe if you're homing in on fruit, you maybe want to do coffee or peat and then go back to that fruit, and then it just leaps out more what the different layers are.
Yeah, for me, I mean, for me, it's I'm fortunate to work in a very beautiful part of the world. So I just walk out for the office for a few minutes if I'm gonna go in through a lot of samples. But what I have found is just taking that, and it just calibrates smelling, and it just calibrates your senses again. But again, each individual has their own little nuances, that what works, what doesn't work for them. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think you have to go into different environments. That's important. That's why actually being at home is great, because you can go into different rooms, go outdoors. Where I am, I'm quite close to the sea, so I could take a dram quite down by the sea and see what it's like in the atmosphere. or there's the woods, and you kind of you can appreciate different aromas in different environments. Is a great thing to do as well.
Or you
Great
can
fun.
take into your son's rooms and smell the different notes and stuff like that.
No, that's all right. I'll leave. They never let me in,
I'm kidding. But we should go back around again, because Frank DeBernardi noticed that I was pouring a little bit of a refill here. And what did you just pour yourself? Well, I have a little more of that Uncle Nearest 1856. What have you two moved on to? Because I know you have more than one glass.
Yes, so I'm on this signatory bottling. I love Glenglassaugh. So this is an Oloroso Sherry Glenglassaugh by Signatory. It's a 20-year-old bottling, and it's I've been smelling it quite often, because there's this amazing passion fruit, and I'm getting, and it's just driving me mad right now. I just want to kind of go more deeper into it and trying to figure out what's going on here. But that's what I'm on, Glenglassaugh. Rachel?
Well, I've got my Glenglassaugh. I was on the BenRiach 10, but this is Glenglassaugh, the Revival, which was the first one that came out. And this is kind of maturing, and it's going to evolve into something interesting very soon. But oh gosh, when it's coming into summertime, I'm on the beach at Sandend Bay, where I used to go with my dad when I was like, 10 years old, and go surfing. And oh, it's incredible. It's like this vanilla ice cream with raspberry syrup and mangoes on top. It's just nothing like it. Nothing like it at all. And it's got butterscotch as well, and popcorn.
Oh.
So, and then this kiss of sea air, no other malt like it. It's incredible. Sound.
Now, that was distilled before Brown-Forman took it over and before you joined the company. So you give some credit to Stuart Nickerson, who revived Glenglassaugh before that. How much credit do you give to the distillers who created the whiskey in the first place when you're doing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm a guardian of quality and of really, I listen to the whiskey and everything that's gone before, as well as nosing it, and take it to the next level. So for me, it's about understanding the nature. It's building on the best that's gone before. There'll be some aspects that maybe didn't quite integrate as well as maybe I think they could, in which case I'll change the dynamic a little bit. So for example, the amount of peated a distillery might distill, or how much peated versus unpeated is woven into a recipe with the different casks. So yeah, you're very much building. I'm a builder. Build on the best of what's gone before and make it even better for the next person who comes along, to nurture and help it grow.
I have a question for you, Rachel, if I may. Yeah, what's a new make like for GlenDronach? Just in your own words, as a blender, the new make for
GlenDronach.
Yeah.
It's incredibly mellow. Oh my goodness. You think spirit off the still is going to be sharp. It's going to be a bit, bouncing about the walls, because some new makes are, incredibly lively and kind of, like a baby born into the world. You don't know what they're going to become.
How long is the fermentation time, for just out of curiosity?
I mean it's wooden washbacks. So they're Scottish larch washbacks. So that's really, 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 that's probably the most important thing. And then it depends on production levels, as I'm sure you're aware, but it'll tend to be at least kind of 3 days long. It's kind of between kind of 56 to 72 hours. With Glenglass, obviously, we've got less production than at GlenDronach, so it would tend to be longer over the weekends, which is why it kind of develops differently. But the big part of GlenDronach is, as well as the wooden washbacks, is that the stills, which are like saxophones. They've got a little hook at the top. If you Google the stills, and they're actually, it's interesting because I've never seen any stills like them in the world. They've kind of got a broad base, and then they've got a boil ball, And then they've got a hook at the top, like, a crook, on a walking stick. And it's kind of like that shape reminds me of cognac stills as well.
Yeah.
That the Alembic has kind of got that shape. And I think this kind of almost the contradiction or the conflict of the kind of the base, the boil ball, and the hook at the top of the swan neck is I think a big part of what gives you that combination of this mellow character that has a base that is robust, but also an elegance that gives you the top notes and the bramble fruit, which again, there must be some element in nature because you do have a seasonality to it as well, which is really interesting. You mentioned fermentation times, but during the year there are subtle nuances of difference as well. So there must be something happening there with nature that we can't quite explain and you can't see.
And this plays perfectly into what Inside the Cask was asking. Aside through learning through practice and institutions like Harriet Watt, do you ever exchange ideas and learn from other master distillers or blenders in the industry? Well, you're watching that right now, because this is one of the few industries where competitors actually talk to each other about their production processes and how they're doing and how they're making whiskey. And I think that's what makes it so much fun.
Yeah, because they're all different, aren't they? I mean, this is the thing: is every single distillery. I mean, especially in Scotland, there's so much diversity in the landscape. From the coast to the mountains and everything in between, and quite a small geographical area that no two are the same. And as I say, you could take a whole distillery and replicate it in somewhere else and it'll be different. So, it's not as if, we all understand that, that it's nature talking as well. I mean, we can influence things to quite a great degree, but, we all let our spirits sing at the end of the day. And, there's nothing to hide. We collaborate through the Scotch Whisky Research Institute, through the Scotch Whisky Association, and through all that collaboration, it makes the industry stronger for it.
Absolutely. And I think even though you might be in a different company, you might be competitors outside, but the blenders, everybody talks to each other. The samples flow, you talk to each other, you ask any questions. It's very open. And I'm not just talking about between me with my Scottish colleagues, but it's just the same with the Japanese colleagues or Indian colleagues or American colleagues. It's just one big fraternity. And that's what I love about this.
Yeah, I think we all appreciate each other's spirits. And the fact that there is this diversity, it's like Japanese whiskey came from Scotland, but it's nothing like Scotch. Off the still, it's got quite a different character from the kind of the character of Scotch.
That stuff that comes off the boat that they bottle over there that looks and tastes an awful lot like Scotch. But that's a topic for another
Single
show.
Malt?
That's
maybe not.
You know where I'm going with this, though. But Jono 1959 has asked this one a couple of times. Dhavall, would you use rum casks at the lakes?
So right now we don't use any rum casks, but I'm not saying no. The house style is sherry, so pretty much Oloroso PX. That's the house style. But I love playing around with different casks. So in the future, I don't know, but there's no plans at the moment.
Okay. And Charles Epperson is asking for you, Rachel, what value added has Brown-Forman brought to the three distilleries? I'm betting it's just in terms of having solid revenue and the ability to not have to worry as much about where the money's coming from for casks.
That's one part of it, but it's also a great collaboration as well across the industry. Because obviously, I work with the other master distillers and Chris Morris and Elizabeth and Jeff Arnett. So it's great to have that collaboration and obviously access to the experiments that they're doing as well, and access to the wood, of course, whether it be Woodford Reserve casks or Old Forester or obviously Jack Daniels, also Sonoma Kutcher in California, the wine casks. So there's wonderful expertise, and with BenRiach in particular, the virgin oak, which for me works incredibly well with BenRiach, and the ability to kind of work with the cooperage in Louisville and Alabama, and understand different toasting levels, charring levels, and what that does to the flavor, which I can then build in and intermingle with bourbon and with rum and with sherry, to create these multiple layers of flavor that you find in BenRiach. So there's lots of aspects, and culturally, I mean, it's a phenomenal company to work for as well. So I think there is the richness of the collaboration. There is the richness of the business that is going to help the distilleries to grow and to shine around the world. I mean, the distribution of Jack Daniels as well. So we have great plans for the distilleries, tapping into that distribution network.
Now I have to ask you, because you just sort of hinted at something that I don't think people know much about. When they opened because Brown-Forman owns two cooperages, the Brown-Forman cooperage in Louisville and the Jack Daniel cooperage in northern Alabama. When that cooperage opened a couple of years ago, the impression everybody was giving was that all the output from that cooperage was going up to Lynchburg to Jack Daniel. Are you telling me that they're supplying you with some virgin oak casks out of Alabama?
Yes, hopefully I'm not going to get into trouble for saying this. No, no, it's fine. Yes, we're getting virgin oak casks from Alabama. So I got a couple of, at least a couple of containers, if not more, every year. So it works so well with BenRiach. And it's interesting you mentioned rum, because our Curiosities expression, our smoky 10-year-old, is a combination of bourbon, cask in the main, then virgin oak and rum. So again, that combination just worked so well with the peated and the unpeated, and allowing those flavors to collide, combine, and intertwine. It really worked so well for BenRiach in particular. That's again finding the character, what's going to work. I don't think it's not something I would try with GlenDronach though.
So would you try some of these, say, Herradura tequila casks with some of your whiskey?
Never say never. Never say never. I mean, I think that might work with peated. I think that could be
good.
Quite exciting to try. I mean, I'm obviously always exploring flavor, trying things out, but it has to be good. It has to be integrated. It has to be, it has to deliver. The most important thing is wonderful aromas, but when you taste, it has to amplify the taste and leave you with, a wonderful, wonderful finish. It has to be integrated. So for me, it's the quality that counts. But yes, we can now, with the Scotch Whisky Order and the technical amendment to the Scotch Whisky Order, we can experiment with a number of different casks. I mean, I think we are one of the most innovative whiskies that can do that, Scotch, because we can use second use casks, unlike in bourbon, and we can source oak, as long as they're made from oak from all over the world. So yeah, lots of fun ahead.
Chris Ratcliffe has a question for you, Dhavall. As a young distillery, what's the bottleneck in your production? Is it capacity, warehousing, sales distribution, and are you planning to ramp up production, and how soon?
Yeah, so I think the bottlenecks are washbacks or fermentation tanks. So we are trying to expand production. So we are very small, 130,000 liters annually production, but we are going to 500,000 liters. That's our production. So it's already work in progress. The whole site is under construction right now. The washbacks are getting delivered in a couple of months. So by next year, we should be on full capacity and we'll be running 24/7. And I like to keep my fermentation times quite long. So my fermentation times at least hit 96 hours, because after the alcoholic fermentation, I like to get into the malolactic fermentation that gives me that yogurty texture, that palate that I'm looking for. So if I actually reduce my fermentation time, my capacity increases quite a bit. But I like to keep it 96. So based on a 96, that's the bottleneck. We have enough capacity for our distillation, enough capacity for our warehousing. So yeah. So.
And one more question. How much input have you had into the Founders Collection? What's the reason for the very different color change in bottle 4 from bottle 3? I'm assuming
Yeah.
type.
Yeah, so I had massive input. So I didn't agree with what the Founders Collection was created. I mean, Founders 1 and 2 was started before, I got into lakes. I didn't agree with it. I didn't agree with the house style. And what I wanted to give, Founders Club members, these are the members who, bought our the first releases of our single malt whiskey anywhere. And I wanted to make it the style very similar to the house style that I was trying to create. So, like I said earlier, the house style was created after, I got on board with Lake. So I wanted to modify the Founders Club collection. That's why there's a big shift from year 2 to year 3 when it became the whiskey, because I've changed the modification. Now, what will happen going forwards for all the members is the whiskey is the same. So I have already pre-blended it. The recipe is the same. So what you will see now is the evolution based on oxidation and time, rather than just, giving you different whiskeys over time. It's just going to be much more sherry driven. That's going to come into play.
And we'll throw out one final question for both of you. Jason Whiskey Wise wants to know, instead of a Scotch, what are your go-to American whiskeys? And Rachel, I know you've got a bunch to choose from behind you on the shelf there, so we'll start with you and then Dhavall.
Yeah, well, I think mine. I mean, my husband and my oldest son is Jack Daniels. They love Jack Daniels, so we've got lots of that. But yeah, this one, Woodford Reserve Double Oaked. That's my personal favorite.
Dhavall?
Yeah, for me, it's Michter's Rye. I think they do an amazing rye whiskey. So yeah, that's my, if I have to go to that would be my go-to bourbon whiskey, or just American whiskey, rye whiskey.
Okay, with that, we will close things up here, and I want to thank both of our guests, Rachel Barrie and Dhavall Gandhi. Sláinte, and thank you for joining us. And Rachel's got the quake out.
I have Uskava Gubra.
What?
Uskava Gubra.
Translate, please. My Gaelic isn't that good. I know the Uskava.
As a keeper of the quake, this is what we say: is Uskava, water of life forever.
Ah, thank you very much. And
thank you for having us.
Thank you. So let me just say a few final closing words here. Once again, thank you for joining us on Whiskey Wednesday. I'm sorry, the Whiskey Friday Happy Hour podcast webcast. It's been one of those nights. I was thinking of Whiskey Wednesday because we have a couple of more great guests coming up on the Whiskey Wednesday webcast this coming week. We will have Connor O'Driscoll from Heaven Hill Distillery joining us, the master distiller there, and Nicole Austin, the master distiller at Cascade Hollow Distillery in Tennessee, also known previously as the George Dickel Distillery. She's just unleashed another annual edition of the George Dickel Bottled and Bond on the world that received rave reviews when it made its debut last year. They will be joining us next week on the Whiskey Wednesday webcast. And I'd like to thank you again for joining us. Don't forget to listen to the WhiskyCast podcast this weekend. We will have more cask-strength conversation for you as always. And we'll see you next Wednesday here on the webcast. And once again, next Friday on our Happy Hour Whiskey Fellowship webcast. Until we meet again, I'm Mark Gillespie. Sláinte, and good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.